Hey, folks, Rick Manning, President of America's for Limited Government here. Some stories just keep getting weirder and weirder, and the sometimes you use the term bombshell, and it's kind of like, or your jaw dropped, and it's just kind of like a lead that doesn't make sense. It's just trying to lead you in and trick you. But the fact that Mike Pence, former Vice President Mike Pence, discovered while classified documents at his home in Mount Carmel, Indiana, in boxes that had been packed up uh, by whoever does that at the vice president's residence, and moved back to his home in Carmel, Mount Carmel, Indiana, and had been taped up and hadn't been opened since he left the vice presidency. The fact that that has now surfaced is somewhat shocking. It's shocking to me. What it tells me is there's a problem in the way that they actually, pack documents. Because we've been pretty tough on Joe Biden for having these documents in Delaware, and the truth of the matter is, having the documents both in Delaware and his Delaware home, and apparently in boxes that were strewn with a bunch of garbage, and in his office and in his library, and essentially throughout the home. Additionally, in what had been an abandoned office at the Biden Penn Center, which is based in D.C. but is a University of Pennsylvania project. That showed that the documents were being used by Biden, whereas the Pence situation is he flatly said he didn't have any, and then he just out of abundance of caution, he said to his attorneys, and I know one of his attorneys from Department of Labor, we worked together. They did a search, they went through boxes that hadn't been opened in 2 years, and they discovered 4 or 5 documents that were marked classified. And so something's amiss, because that shouldn't happen. And it just shouldn't happen. And I don't know what the problem is, but the fundamental difference, even though from a legal perspective, Vice President Biden and Vice President Pence neither had the ability to declassify documents. Donald Trump, just by virtue of saying, take those boxes and move them out of here and take them down to Mar-a-Lago, he declassified those documents. That was a de facto thing. And once again, we'll get back to the Trump piece of it, just to remind you. When President Ronald Reagan was meeting with Soviet Union Premier Mikhail Gorbachev at Reykjavik, Iceland, Ronald Reagan, in meeting with Gorbachev, sat there and said to him, "We're developing an anti-missile system that will destroy intercontinental ballistic missiles. And it's designed to make sure we don't have a nuclear war, certainly not an inadvertent nuclear war. So it's designed to make sure we don't have a nuclear war. And we'll give it to you because we want, just as we have mutually assured destruction, we want to make sure that, that both sides have the missile defense to make certain that you are safe from an intercontinental nuclear missile." And Reagan's advisors went nuts because that was top secret. That was the most secret thing they were doing. And Ronald Reagan violated the classified nature of that information by talking to Gorbachev about it. But the legal fact was that they all had to admit was he was the one person who could decide what was classified or not classified, not them. And so similarly, Donald Trump ultimately was the person who could decide whether the documents that he had shipped to Mar-a-Lago were classified or not classified. That's the law. Okay, so so all this garbage that's going on with Trump is completely different than the situation with Biden and Pence now. Situation Biden and Pence is that vice presidents don't have, while they're covered under the Presidential Records Act, they don't have the ability to, and so that means the National Archives keeps their papers and keeps that kind of stuff, and it becomes part of the public history of the administration. And that's been that way since 1978. But the problem we have is that suddenly, because of packing, apparently, at least in the Pence case, because of packing, items and just saying, okay, well, put this in there and just take this file cabinet and dump it into this box. Apparently, as you might imagine, people aren't going through every paper in every file cabinet before they get packed. And as a result, if, for instance, a classified document dealing with a very specific issue that's happening, that's very pertinent and helpful in understanding what the circumstances are, ends up in a file cabinet and then ends up in a box and then ends up at your residence, and you don't even know it was there. You sit there and you don't remember you put a confidential document in a file 3 years ago. And suddenly you end up with a confidential document in your possession outside of when you're supposed to. Is that really punishable? Is that really a crime? Somebody else packing something up and sending it off to your house. Biden's example is different. Biden used the documents. He clearly was using the documents because they were in his office. They were in the office that he was occupying in the Biden-Pence Center. And the documents were pertinent to things he was very privy to and continued to work on while he wasn't vice president, in his 4 years out of public service. Because some of them were on Ukraine, okay, which he spent a huge amount of time on. But nonetheless, we have two vice presidents now, each who had classified documents at their homes. And while the circumstances of each, in terms of whether they were utilized or not, whether or not the vice president Biden knew that he had the documents and Pence didn't know he had the documents, all those facts involved are going to end up getting wrapped up into a big ball. But the question is, how the hell did this happen in the first place? I've got to bring you what Donald Trump had to say on this, because I think it's pretty interesting. When you go to CNN, if you go to CNN Politics and just look up Pence classified documents, you'll get the story of how it all occurred. But I'm going to just listen to, just after this whole story, at the bottom of the story, last line, talks about Donald Trump's reaction. Former President Trump, however, came to Pence's defense on Tuesday. Quote, Mike Pence is an innocent man. He never did anything knowingly dishonest in his life. Leave him alone, Trump posted on his social media site. So Donald Trump understands that this is a circumstance of somebody else packing up stuff, sending it to his house, and Pence having no knowledge that it was even there. And and as a result, is it a crime? Maybe. But if you can't show that he was actually the person who packed the documents in there, and you can't show that he ever touched the documents, then you have to assume that you don't know, he didn't commit a crime. Maybe the moving man committed a crime. Bottom line is, unless you can show that he had some knowledge that those were there and that he was keeping them for specific purposes, then you can't blame him if the moving man unknowingly takes documents that are classified and ships them off to his house. So it's a weird situation. We really have to deal with this in a meaningful way, because yes, it is insecure. Having classified documents outside of the control and safety and control of the federal apparatus is dangerous. Um, and so we have to figure out how to move records better at the end of presidencies. But I keep going back to the kind of the genesis of all this, which, believe it or not, isn't the raid on Trump in Mar-a-Lago. It's Hillary Clinton's having a separate private email server where classified information was going through that, and that to me was the most important piece, because that was clearly a violation of law and it clearly had classified documents in it. So that's what the situation is. I'm going to read a couple of comments and then we're going to go and then we'll go from there. Looks like a viral virus. Yeah, Florida girl, look at me. Yeah, there's something about the swamp, and I can tell you for a fact that when I worked at the Labor Department, I never got any classified documents, and consequently, I took none with me. Well, you know what, Tom, that's that's one of the things that I think is a fair comment, and it's one of the things that's kind of challenging. If an average person, let's say somebody works for the Navy or something, inadvertently puts a document in a briefcase, carries it home, puts a document on a thumb drive that's classified. Well, that's a different circumstance. Let's say just a document. They take a document, they put it in their briefcase, they take it home completely inadvertently, leave it there. If they're like me, the briefcase has all sorts of stuff that they've taken home that they mean to look at, and then they never do. And then later on got popped for stealing a document, but they never looked at it. They never did anything with it. They essentially just screwed up. It's a passive offense, and yet it gets treated very seriously for obvious reasons. I think we remember General David Petraeus, who was CIA director, ended up losing his career in government, his career anyway, had to resign because he left his official schedule out. And a woman who was not his wife, who he was having an affair with, saw the schedule. And I don't know how the government investigators knew that she saw the schedule, but she was also had a top secret clearance, but she wasn't cleared for that information. And they took that fact that he had allowed classified information that was for his eyes only to be seen by somebody else with a clearance. And they used it as a means to drum him out to get him to resign from as CIA director. And you remember, he was forced to resign CIA director immediately after he refused to have the CIA take the blame for Benghazi. And so he got forced out over a classified document issue. And this is kind of the challenge to all this. We now have a weaponized situation where this is where people are, that where we're going to end up with a tit for tat forever over so-called handling of classified documents. And ironically, the only person who didn't get a special counsel over it was Hillary Clinton, who had classified documents being run over an unsecure server in Denver for years. And her attorneys were allowed the opportunity to go through all the emails to decide what should be turned in and what shouldn't be turned in. And she smashed her mobile device, and many of her friends that were working with her smashed their mobile devices, so documents couldn't be taken off of them. And the server, and we had a bit of use of bit bleach to try to erase the records. If ever there was an obstruction of justice case, that was it. But we know that Hillary Clinton never paid a price for any of it. So what do we do? How do we proceed? First of all, if I were Merrick Garland, I would normalize the investigations. I would take it and I would say, we don't need a special counsel. We don't need to have somebody running amok everywhere. We're going to get rid of the special counsels involved in this, both Jack White, who's a special counsel on Trump's proper handling of classified information, and Biden's improper handling of classified information. And at some point, Pence is improperly having classified information. So we'll end up having that. So get rid of the special counsels. We cannot have governance, the Department of Justice having special counsels, essentially committing many legal coups against elected officials. Congress has the power, the sole power to remove a president. And it is up to Congress to investigate that. And a special counsel being used as a shield by the Biden administration and by the Department of Justice to not allow Congress to do their constitutional duty to determine if the President of the United States has committed a high crime and misdemeanor is a constitutional violation. And what's more, what most people don't realize is special counsel is an outgrowth of a regulation. There's no special counsel law. There used to be a special prosecutor law. It was eliminated because somebody had the audacity to use it against Bill Clinton. So Ken Starr, if you all remember. And so the Democrats in Congress said, we're getting rid of the special prosecutor. And the Department of Justice then said, well, based on our power to investigate, we're going to create a special counsel regulation that allows us to create this special little office that has far-ranging power to investigate and prosecute a president of the United States or a vice president. It's time to get rid of it. Special counsels altogether. It is the proper role for Congress to have full and unfettered access to the evidence related to the Biden case so that they can make a determination whether this is an impeachable offense. Presidents can't be prosecuted. That's the law. Congress has the power to impeach a president if they find he's behaved in a way that is that's unconstitutional. We saw that Nancy Pelosi's House exercise that prerogative twice against President Trump, and the Senate failed to convict both times, rendering the impeachment meaningless. But there's absolutely no need for a special counsel to be involved in any of this. A fairly simple investigation. And when it is Congress's constitutional responsibility to make these determinations. And when an employee of the President of the United States, because he runs the executive branch, the Department of Justice is not an independent branch, employee of the executive branch, an employee of President Biden, they can say, Merrick Garland can say, nope, you can't get any information on this because we've got a special counsel. That's obstructing the Constitution, using extra legal means to do so, because special counsel doesn't have a right to exist. Given that, what we've learned is after the Mueller investigation, after we saw special counsel try to entrap people and go after also anybody associated with Donald Trump for any reason they can imagine, prosecute them in the District of Columbia or Northern Virginia, where the jury pool was tainted at best, and get convictions against people totally unrelated to any of the initial allegations, because the special prosecutor just went on a absolute witch hunt, aiming at anybody and everybody who ever was associated with Donald Trump, all on a false premise that the special counsel knew at the outset of the investigation was there. We have to get rid of the special counsel. And if the Biden administration, if Joe Biden being subjected to a special counsel is the means, the bipartisan means to get that done, then we need to do it. I'm tired of these coups being done out of the Department of Justice. And I don't care if it's being done against Biden, it's being done against Trump, it's being done against some future president. That's not the Department of Justice's job. And the problems we have with this weaponized Department of Justice, which seems to think that they run the country and not the duly elected representative who was elected by the people, whether you agree with the methods and modes and the various shenanigans and illegal activities associated with the 2020 election. Joe Biden's president, and I'm sick of this. I'm sick of the back and forth. I'm sick of the coup, the constant coup, and how it seems to always emanate from a Department of Justice that appears to be completely without any moorings whatsoever. Bureaucrats of the Department of Justice don't get to determine who's president. I'm sick of them trying to do so. Joe Biden he did commit a crime. He had illegal documents. He had classified documents at his residence, and he clearly accessed those documents based upon the fact they were in various locations in his residence. Mike Pence, fact is, did he commit a crime? Well, no. If somebody boxed it up and he didn't know it was in there and they sent it to his home, how can he be held responsible for that? But I'm sure there'll be those who try. And Donald Trump absolutely had a right to have the documents. As president, he could declassify it. He declassified each and every one of those things simply by telling them to take them to his house, to his private residence. So that's kind of where we are. Expect to hear a lot of yelling and screaming about Pence. Bottom line is, it's really just, I don't know if I were a cabinet secretary and they boxed up my junk from my office and they took and the people were boxing it up, took something they weren't supposed to take. And, and I didn't find out and didn't really find it until 3 years later and said, wait a second, they took something that was yours. Should I be charged with theft from the federal government? Well, no, it's absurd. But that's what they're going to try to do to Mike Pence in this. And ironically, because Joe Biden's president, he can't be prosecuted for that. But Mike Pence is, because he's not president, and because he technically having those documents in his home was illegal, could be prosecuted. And if he was prosecuted in Washington, D.C., they'd likely find him guilty because we have an unequal system of government. And quite honestly, once again, I'm sick of it. And I wish I had good things to say, but man, I'm so frustrated. So this just irritates me so much that we've devolved to this point in our country that apparently everybody gets a special counsel. If anybody who runs for president in 2024 better be prepared that every aspect of their life is going to be torn through by a special counsel, if they're Republican in particular, because that's the precedent we've seen. And the most amazing part of this is Donald Trump, with all of his businesses, was a developer in New York, as you all know, with all his businesses, with all his interests, with everything he did, they could never get him on anything. They could never get him on anything. Donald Trump was the cleanest businessman in the history of the world because they turned his lawyer, and there was nothing there that they could convict him on. They couldn't get him on anything. They turned his presidency upside down. They couldn't get they basically found nothing. He was the single most investigated person in the history of the world. And now they're trying to get him on records charges because debate over whether or not he was allowed to have records. It's time to put an end to this crap. I'm sick of it. With that, I want to be more upbeat today. I really promise tomorrow I will be. Actually, I won't do this tomorrow. I'll promise you on Thursday that I will be. But thanks for tuning in. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government, and we will be with you on Thursday.